Let's see who's here. So Joe Betsy is running a couple minutes late, so she'll be here if she's not already in the room there.
Yeah, are we on? Okay, Joe Betsy's in the room. She's getting on now.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Marvin, can Barry hear you?
All right, I'll speak louder. We'll turn it up. I've never been accused of not being heard. Here we go. How about now? I'm better?
It's
I can hear.
better, but you'll have to like yell.
On the wall. See if we can turn it up.
Let's see.
How about now? No?
About the same.
How about on your computer right there on the computer? Yeah, that's just. And that has the same as that.
Yeah, it's disconnected from there. I'm trying to determine, do we have everybody here?
I think we do. Shelby, we're waiting on Shelby.
Okay, was Larry able to dial in?
Um,
I sent him the link.
yeah,
I just sent him the link.
Stephanie just sent him the link, so he should be able to dial
Okay,
it. And
I know Tina was trying to dial in, but she was waiting on being let in someplace, she said.
yeah, Barry's on.
Yeah.
there's Larry. Okay.
I think we're still waiting on Shelby.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna check in with her real.
Well, we sent her the information, so she should be logging in right now.
Yeah, Shelby called me and said she didn't get the original email.
I resent it this morning.
Okay.
This is my biggest pleasure. Italian ones. Just.
While we're waiting, I'll just advise everybody, the gentleman to my left, your right is David Mardecki. He's not a staff member, he's a board member. He's here live.
She's been right.
That's what Shelly was on.
Yeah.
We're gonna announce goals
Yes.
if we start. I just want to make sure.
She's the manager and then Shelby Kale is partner. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, all right, so, oh, yes, very good. No, I think I was trying to count it.
David.
It does, I know. Then I'm so, but is that Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
All right, Michelle.
Yes.
Okay, I think we are ready to go. The chair is back in her room. She's on mute. There we go. Okay. We're ready.
I heard you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is September 28th, 2022, and the time is 9:13 a.m. And I'm calling to order the regular quarterly meeting of the Board of Directors of the Texas Property and Casualty Insurance Guarantee Association. This is a video conference meeting that is being conducted in accordance with Section 551.127 of the Texas Government Code. As required by statute, I am present at the TPCIGA offices, as is Director David Nardecchia. Currently, we have 8 board members and 1 industry vacancy. The Texas Department of Insurance is in the process of reviewing the board's recommendation to fill that vacancy. All current board members are in attendance, so a quorum is present. TPCIGA staff in attendance are Marvin Kelly, John D'Amato, Annette Evans, Stephanie Mendoza, and Gary Vieira. TDI staff that's present that I've seen on screen are Vane Hugo and Brian Rewe. Is there anybody else from TDI? I know Tina was having some issues maybe dialing in, and so we'll announce her if she joins us later.
Okay.
We are also joined by TPCIGA's outside counsel, Shelby Betts, and Michelle McDermott from Plant Moran, the outside audit firm that TPCIGA uses. At this time, I'd also like to give the antitrust admonition and remind everyone that we do have members of the board who are competitors in the marketplace. Therefore, we must all exercise care and avoid any discussions that might give rise to an allegation of a violation of state or federal antitrust laws. Please speak up if you have any concerns. Next, we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the review and approval of the summary of the official minutes of the June 15th, 2022 regular meeting of the Board of Directors. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And who was that?
Steve Holt. Steve
Thank you.
Holt.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
Tiffany,
Second,
Could you announce yourself? Who was the second?
Steve Flynn.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Is there any discussion, any questions, any edits? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. And I will, for the record, also say that we have Tina Arendal from the Texas Department of Insurance has joined the meeting. Next, we'll move on to item 3, which is the first executive session. And so the time is now 9:16 a.m. and is authorized by section 551.079 of the Texas Government Code. The board will adjourn into closed executive session to consider the Texas Department of Insurance Office of Supervisory Interventions oversight report regarding troubled and insolvent property and casualty insurers. Everyone should have received a link to this first executive session, including the Texas Department of Insurance. I think anybody that's not invited to that executive session, I think they will just put you kind of on hold in the general session and stop the recording.
So do we leave and come back to go to the next link?
Yes. And the link was in the meeting invite that you received, the links to both of the executive sessions.
I'm gonna talk number 80. Yeah. This whole aging thing is. See, think about these things that she's had. It's kind of last night. It's been so much. And then they get a more cognitive workout. I feel better because I guess my list shows that I maintain that. Part of the motivation. Well, that's exactly. Children. They're
All right. Looks like we've got all of our board members. The time is now 9:34, and we are back in open session, and no action is required from our executive session. And just for the record, I wanted to announce that, well, I don't know if she's joined this part, but Caitlin Merrick joined us for the executive session, and we anticipate her joining us for the open session. We will move on to item number 4, the executive director report.
Good morning again. Let's going back and forth as part of our wellness program running through these different offices. I'll start out just by doing a review. Who's going to be presenting what and who will be assisted by. We start off today with the executive committee. Our chair, Joe Betsy Morgan, will be going through that draft policies in reference to ethics and confidential information for our employees. Following that, Human Resources Committee, and just as a reminder to everyone, we had our prior chair of the Human Resources Committee had resigned from the board, and Joe Betsy is operating in an interim capacity as chair of the HR committee. So she'll address the items concerning the 2023 merit pool, health insurance, and replacement for yours truly. That'll be followed by the claims committee. Our chair of the claims committee, Mark Tasui, will be assisted by Annette Evans, the claims director. And then we go on to an update of the existing insolvencies and the additional ones we just heard about. That'll be followed by the finance and audit committee. And we have a number of things, including our draft budget. And just for the benefit of the new members, we've been doing draft budgets for 30 years. It was a request of the board that we do a draft prior to a final budget in December. So we do that. We also have presentations by our auditors, our fraud audit. Frank Moran will be making presentations on that, as well as a discussion on assessments and a number of other standard reports that we provide every week. And finally, finishing that, we'll go into our second executive session, which will be for the board, for them to have a discussion. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair. Ready to go.
All right, thank you, Marvin. The next item is item 5, the executive committee, and it's basically consideration of some draft corporate governance documents. I emailed those drafts that were prepared by our outside counsel to the board this morning. We're not taking any action today. This is something that I've asked them to review and comment on before the December board meeting, where I would contemplate that we might take some action. I told them I'm kind of comparing these documents with some of the corporate governance documents that my company has and some other boards that I serve on, what they have, and really would love for everybody to give it, a thorough review, and feel free to reach out with questions, comments, suggested edits, anything else. And so I think that's a good move going forward. While we're on the corporate governance topic, one of the things that we had discussed was to just to provide some board education, brief but meaningful, at least a couple of the meetings a year. And I think a couple of the items that that have been discussed is just providing a more thorough education on just how the assessments work holistically. I know we're going to hear some of that today, but I think Shelby's going to be working on something like that. And Shelby, help me. When there was another topic we were also having on corporate governance.
Just the requirements around the financial statements, kind of the two main duties of the finance and audit committee, really, assessments and making sure the statements are properly filed and the auditor is in compliance with the TDI regulation and good corporate governance.
Yeah, and I think with some new board members, that'll just be real helpful, and just a fundamental education on those important topics. So if you've got any other topics that you would like to have for consideration, just give me call or email me and we can begin work on that as well. And that's really it. Are there any questions on that? Item number 5? If not, we can move on to item number 6. And hold on one second, because I think I got. Give me just one second. Okay, so I did get an email from Caitlin Merritt from TDI, and she is listening in to the open session. So on item number 6, we're not going to be taking any action today. This is just to bring y'all up to speed on just some items that will most likely come before the board, either at the December meeting or possibly a special called board meeting on a narrow topic. So each year, as part of the budget process, we come up with a recommended merit pool and grid shift for employees. I've got some inquiries out just to get some industry and market data. And I know that we usually touch base with the company members just to kind of see where they are. And we'll also be talking with John and Tabitha. But we want to take these HR actions that have budget consequences kind of in a holistic manner. So we'll also be considering if we're going to make any changes to the employee sharing on the funding of the health insurance premiums. And I think, and John, you can add on, but I think what John told me is that they're in the process of working with the broker to see about what the consequence, whether positive or negative, on whether we move the effective date of TPCIGA's health insurance coverage, which is currently on July 1, to see if they moved it to January 1. And I think they'll have some information on that in the next couple of weeks. John, is there anything more to add on that item?
No, that's right. So we went through open enrollment for July 1 effective date. We have some brokers in action looking at some really good opportunities. We're obviously not going to move towards another plan, provided that moving to 1/1 wouldn't give us a reduction in premiums.
Okay. Then the next item, I've got a draft job description for the executive director position. And so I'm going to try to convene the Human Resources Committee, in the next week to 10 days if possible, and get that. Basically, we will consider any internal candidates that apply, but we'll also post this and send it to some stakeholders like NCIGF and post it on some websites. And this is the item that could require a special board meeting between now and December. So, the HR committee will serve as the initial screen of any resumes that we receive. And then we're going to end up reporting to the full board, and we can have a discussion on some of the finalists. Would love to hear from y'all if anybody would like to take a more active role in, having some either virtual interviews or some screening. Would love to hear from you. And I'm going to go just move in front of the light switch so that the light will come back on in this room. All right. So are there any questions on the HR items? All right, then we'll move on to item number 7, which is the claims committee, and that would be Mark T.
All right, thanks, Joe Betsy. So yeah, I'll have Annette give an update on the claims committee as far as the activities on the current insolvencies that the TPCIGA is working on. There was one new insolvency since the last time we met, which is Western Property and Casualty. So she'll give an update on the new claim volume there. Relatively stable in terms of our pending claims volume as of right now, but as Marvin was talking about, and several questions at the beginning of the meeting, there really is going to be a lot of concern regarding Florida. So with Hurricane Ivan and with the situation with just with the financial strength of the insurers out there, we will see an impact in Texas. So I don't know if Marvin and Annette have an update on that, but that's going to be a big concern. I think everyone in the industry that's on the board is really watching what's going to happen in Florida, because that will be the biggest thing coming. Other than that, there was a big spike in our unearned premium processing, but that really is a pretty automated process. So I'll have Annette give an update on that. And then finally, she'll give an update just on the staffing status. as an organization, that there's still continues to be a challenge, just like every company, in terms of finding strong candidates when we have openings. So Annette will give a quick update on that also. So with that, Annette, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So like Mark said, the claims inventory is remaining about the same. We're closing as many claims as we're getting new ones in, so we're a little under 7,000. When we reviewed this on the 12th, our premium was high. We had almost 15,000 waiting to be paid, but we've since paid them, and they were the lighthouse claims. If you remember, we eventually paid a little bit over 19,000 unearned premium claims for lighthouse, but we've since paid them. Litigation count also was pretty steady. We're still getting new ones in, but we're closing as many as we've got. We're about 2,500. UNP reserves, same as UNP count. We reserve started at 1.5 and ended at about 1.6. Again, that's been paid already. Staff adjusters, we were down one. We hired one and got them onboarded since. So we're at 6 staff adjusters now. And like Mark said, the way things have been going, we may need to adjust our staffing to our staff adjusters to contact adjuster ratio, so that we can give our supervisors more help. So we'll do that. We had 43 overall adjusters, including the independents at the beginning of the quarter, and it was 48. 6 of them were on board to do the new insolvency Weston. We just started to get those claims in, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Recoveries, we recovered about 432,000 on the quarter, 77% of that being net worth. We had a good quarter for adjusting our medical billing. We received almost $6 million in medical expense billings, but we were able to save about 70% of that, only ended up paying 1.7 million. So our cost containment processes are working really well there. So any questions on the quarterly updates, how we're moving from first quarter to second quarter? Pretty steady on everything. The only change is we're moving from, auto to property on our claims. Those claims look just a little bit different, require a little bit different. As far as individually, the claims that the insolvencies that we're still working a lot with is still ACCC, the American Central Casualty Company. That was an insolvency out of Texas. That was the Texas one that the repossession date was December 30th, 2020, and we got the first claims in 2021, January. Ended up with almost 9,000 claims, about 4,000 pending, with about 56% of those in liquidation, another 20% being attorney reps. So that's where heavy litigation count is coming from, PCCC. We also still dealing with Bedivere a little bit. That was a environmental and workers' comp insolvency. We were able to close all of the environmental ones. Those companies all hit our net worth exclusion, meaning that all of the companies were worth over $50 million. So we didn't have to pay anything on those. We still have about 40 of the workers pending, and they'll be out there for a while. American Capital Insurance, or AMCAP, was the next one that came along in April of 2021, and that was the commercial and multifamily dwelling insolvency. We only got about 780 claims. We had a little under 100 pending, about 93. But those are the claims that were large. We had some condo associations and apartment buildings that had up to 125 buildings on the policies that were all covered. We're entertaining one right now that has a $4.6 million estimate. So we're looking we're still handling that one. Well, that was slowed down a lot. That's one of the main ones. And then a couple months later, we got Gulfstream property casualty. That was single family residential, homeowners in condo out of Florida. We only got about 36 claims, 11 of those pending. We got Western General out of California that came a few months later in August. We're still dealing with some of those claims. Global Liberty, they got 3 months after that in October. That was commercial auto. Fortunately, that one was small. We got about 5 claims on those. 3 of them were connected and or in litigation, so they'll be around for a little bit. We also got excess home insurance in January of this year. It was our first 2022 insolvency. That was a single homeowner insurer out of Louisiana. Got about 30 claims out of that. A little more than 20 are pending. Lighthouse is the one I mentioned before. We so far got about 1,300 claims. Claims are still reopening, so we're still getting reopens and new claims reported every day. I think I mentioned before, property insurance, the actual tax value on the claim is paid, and the insurers were closing the claims, and then when the depreciation is due, they were reopening. So we were getting reopened claims on that one every day. When we initially got that insolvency, we were told to expect like 378 claims, and we've got 1,300 so far. They also had a little under 20,000 policies. So we paid 19,480 on premium claims that total more than $20 million. And we still have probably about 400 or 500 that we're expecting from the receiver. And like Mark mentioned, after that, we got Weston Property Casualty Insurance Company. That's our newest insolvency. We got first part of August. We just started receiving some of the claims information. I think we got about a little over 500 claims initially. Again, they are reopening as well on depreciation claims. So we expect to get at least double that, if not more. They had before the policy cancellation date 30,000 policies. They're expected to have right under 30,000 when we get them. So that's going to be another big leap fine. The TDI and TWIA and the TPCIGA tried to get together and work out some a different way to address that. Didn't work, but I think the TDI came up with, together with TWIA, came up with another way to make sure the policyholders didn't miss any coverage period. So we're still handling the UEP in the normal way. So we're expecting about a little bit under 30,000 to have to pay on those pretty soon.
Annette,
Yes.
are you expecting to get any more policies in on Lighthouse property? So you've got 19.5 basically in so far for unearned premium claims. Do you expect to get additional ones?
Yes, I think there's probably about 400 or 500 that the receiver is still working on. Those are ones with some special cancellation dates, other things that he's working on. He's having some issues trying to validate the amounts and get them sent over to us. But just got about 400 of them a couple weeks ago, and he says there's another batch pending. He said don't ever call it a final batch, but there's about 400 or 500 pendings.
Okay, but we're not expecting like another 5,000 or 10,000.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
There was probably a total of just under 20,000, and we've already paid like 19,500. So it shouldn't be too many more.
Okay, thank you.
Weston's gonna be a big one, it's gonna be slightly bigger as far as our premium is concerned. And then the one that we just heard about, the FedNat Act has already, the order's already been signed. And as I understand, we have 3,700 Texas policy, so we'll have to deal with that. Claims count, not sure about, we're looking at 500 plus initially, but whatever will reopen. So I'm looking at probably at least double that, maybe more. That's all for the open receiverships. Any other questions on those? We've had a couple more, but they're dwindling in their claim count, so didn't go over those.
Annette,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I had a question on ACCC. What is it about that insolvency that is so litigious? Because it sounds like the attorneys are spending a lot of time trying to work through these, and none of the other companies really mention legal claims. So I just wondered what's so unique about that company that's giving rise to all the legal claims.
I have my thoughts, and what I found out in going through the claims is that there's very little contact follow-up on the claims. If anybody on the phone on the committee is a claims person,
Courtney Neiman.
you'll know that if you don't proactively handle something, it's gonna get in an attorney's hand. And so there's little active follow-up through ACCC, and now what we're seeing is a lot of the statute dates are coming due, and the attorneys are being forced to file, check the statute. And so they're filing. So we're getting new lawsuits in every day on these because statute of limitation, otherwise they're running.
My prior life in the insurance world as well, that my experience was that management, back when they were solvent, they had a lot of complaints. Even then with the department, and they, to me, their claim handling wasn't the best in the first place. And I think they had a lot of problems before they went insolvent. That's just my take.
Only other thing I would add is, there is a COVID impact for pending suits. So the courthouses are really backed up. So you're just not seeing a lot of cases going to trial also. So there's a backlog on pending cases that just stay open a lot longer than they would have.
This is Brian with TDI. I think there's a combination of reasons, but I can confirm that it was prior management strategy to litigate. That was the way they handled claims. So I think there's a historic carryover as a portion of this.
But from TPCIGA's standpoint, I mean, does it add to the cost of trying to resolve these things because it's going through the legal system? I mean, I assume the attorney on board is spending a lot of time, and there's probably outside attorneys that are being used as well. And, I'm just wondering, kind of cost benefit analysis, is there any way, TPCIGA can work to try to resolve these without continuing to expend costs that maybe at the end of the day outweigh the benefits?
Yes, absolutely. And keep in mind, these are all $30,000 policies. So we try not to let any of those, go to trial unless that's absolutely necessary, or the claim attorney a lot of times don't want to go to court either because they're spending money as well. That's, let's face it, not really there. So we are trying to close those and mediate them and settle them as much as we can. Some of them, again, the attorneys are just filing and then they go back in their hiding holes, and we don't hear from them again. One of the things on the Guarantee Act is that the claimant needs to use all the other insurance before they can make a claim through the Guarantee Act. And a lot of the times, the plaintiff attorneys are not willing to give us that information. So a lot of times if there's a holdup, but even then, we have ways around that. We do contingent offers or, you know, whatever it is, to try to get them settled. But we in no way want to go to court normally on a $30,000 policy, because attorney fees alone gonna match that almost. So we're doing our best efforts to get them closed, and so, and we don't end up in court on many of them.
Larry, just for your benefit, when we have a lot of litigation, there's a 6-month stay for the guarantee fund system. So we have 6 months to deal with that. Our priority are getting claims in and initiating that process. Also, we actually employ, when it's a solvent company, they have a different set of attorneys, probably making a substantial amount more. We have a pool of attorneys that we utilize, and we pay lower costs because we can give them a volume of claims. So those are some of the things that we do to try to address the cost.
Okay, thank you.
And finally, just as Mark talked about, we've got a few open positions here at TPCIGA. Two of them are administrative in nature. I think cross our fingers, we've got one of them filled if the person shows up on the day they're supposed to, because we've been ghosted before. And we're trying to fill the other one, but we've got people still not showing up, scheduled interviews or canceling them at the last minute. So we have issues trying to keep the staff maintained. And like I mentioned before, I'm taking another look at the TPCIGA employees and contact ratio. The supervisors that are here, we have 2. Or the only ones, along with myself, that can approve claim payments and you know, injury payments and everything else. And right now, they're just bombarded with stuff, and they're working 7 days a week. And I've got to find a way to get them some relief at the same time, making sure we're responding timely to kind of, you know, keep the complaint counts down. So we're having to look our employee ratio, and right now in this time employment wise environment, you know, salary and work from home and that type of stuff still comes up often. So that's a challenge to us. Other than that, I think we've already talked about the fact that all the insurance environment and the weather environment in Florida along the coast of Louisiana is not going to make things, it doesn't make for a good outlook for Texas. Well, I expected this insolvency to be bad now, and I expect at least 1 or 2 more, and that's without knowing if any of the smaller ones are also in trouble. I think you guys maybe were aware that one of the rating agencies, Diamondtech, downgraded up 17 or 20 insurance companies in Florida. And I think a lot of them are in trouble. And this storm, or if God forbid, there's another one on the heels of it, will likely knock them out as well. So we'll probably see even more. So we strive to maintain their contact relationships, so we can make sure we're jumping on those lines and make sure our TPCIGA staff is prepared to handle everything that's coming in. Any other questions on claims?
I just have one comment in reference. This is just for the new board members as well. Texas always has a number of greater exposure based on non-domestic companies, because everybody wants to write business in Texas. So the insolvencies that we're going to see in the future may be coming out of Florida and Louisiana, with a large footprint here in Texas. So we just happen to be one of the top markets. Everybody wants to be here. So we are impacting the Guarantee Association from out of state more so than in-state insolvencies. The other thing that I'll mention is Weston is an example of the alternatives that regulators are looking at. When TWIA came to us, actually TDI came to us with an alternative in transitioning those Weston policies to the wind pool. And they had some idea that we could do a feature that we have to do an assignment, that we could take on the responsibility of paying the wind pool. And then I think Joe Betsy sent me something where they went a different direction and decided to do something different. They were able to address that issue. But I think all regulators are looking at alternatives as opposed to liquidating a company, specifically doing runoffs as opposed to liquidations. The other thing I'll mention is the unearned premium is an issue. The special deputy receiver has the responsibility of doing the calculations for unearned premium. All we do is validate it, and then we make the payment. Normally, unearned premium is paid at the end of the year. But recently, the last couple of years, we've been paying it on the front end, so that they can transition the policies to other insurers. So that's an unusual situation as well. It impacts what we pay out.
Annette, I had one question for you. In the notes, on page 1, you talk about how the number of staff adjusters decreased from 6 to 5 due to the resignation of a senior adjuster. And then on page 4, there's at the top of that page, it says, as it stands, TPCIGA only has had 2 staff adjusters. I was trying to reconcile those statements.
So we had 2 staff adjusters initially, one of them retired or resigned, and we did hire another one. So we're back to 2. She's just being onboarded. She was working for one of the contractors, so she's pretty familiar with ours. So we're back to 2. We only have 2 staff adjusters and 2 staff supervisors. So we had 2, we lost one, and we hired back pretty quickly because we were looking for one anyway. So
I don't get it. So on page 1, does that number, the 6 reduced to 5, that includes contractors or supervisors, or what is that number?
Those are just staff adjusters. So the other adjusters are workers' comp adjusters. I'm sorry. So if I make that, so we have 2 property and casualty adjusters.
Okay.
And the other are workers' comp adjusters, and they're still here.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the Claims Committee? All right, Joe Betsy, we didn't have any proposals for the board to vote on, so that's it for the Claims Committee.
Thank you, Mark and Annette. Appreciate that. We'll move on to item number 8 and call the Finance and Audit Committee and call on Tiffany Reiner, the chair.
All right, good morning, everyone. So we have quite a few items on the Finance and Audit Committee report today. John and I are going to tag team this like we normally do. So feel free to jump in at any time with questions. But our first is item A, which is the draft operating budget. This again is draft. We will not vote on this today. As we met on the Finance Committee meeting prior to this, there are some changes that are included within here. Mainly some salary changes that we do not yet have finalized from the HR committee, any grid shifts or anything like that. So again, it's only estimates in here, and we'll finalize those when we get to December. So but employee insurance, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, trying to move that to a 1/1 effective date. So again, what is in here is the 7/1 effective date, and the change that is expected from that. I will say, it is a big increase. It's a 15% increase over last year's. I think it's for a couple of various reasons. One is the increase, but also we have a couple more employees than we did last year. So, okay. Retirement. Again, this is primarily driven as it is a function of salaries. So the increase there. We are coming out of post-COVID, so we have adjusted our travel and education budgets to reflect a more post-COVID environment. So very similar to the pre-COVID atmosphere that we were all used to a few years ago. We hadn't been out traveling very much since then, but now that has started back up, as well as getting people out to do their continuing education. Due to, so all of these insolvencies that Annette and Mark have been talking about this morning, we do increase our budget, for labor and other things throughout. So we also have consulting fees that are part of our budget. And so we do have an increase overall for consulting fees, but a decrease for contract labor. So. Mhm. And the last is audit fees here. So I'm on page 3 in your binder. You can see right now we have a decrease in audit fees. Last year we did do an extra audit. It is an audit that we only plan to do every 3 or so years, so that we are not going to account for that this year. Okay. The other thing is I would call out is this line item could change before December, as we are in the middle of our RFP, which we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. Okay. Moving on to insurance. So our favorite topic, our cyber policy did go up substantially. This policy is a Chubb. Couple of reasons. One, we have had a prior claim, but 2, the way in which the premium is calculated is basically off of an entity's revenue. Our revenue, as you know, fluctuates significantly from year to year. So in the 2020 year, our revenue was suppressed. In the 2021 year, our revenue was elevated. Both of these things, so the revenue along with our prior claim, did cause a pretty substantial, and I do mean substantial, increase in our overall premium. So that is what is accounted for on line 14 for insurance, as it is this cyber policy, and it is a big chunk to swallow. So.
Tiffany, if I can just make a comment there.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 7B, we referenced 71 million in 21. Just want to remind everyone on the call that included in that 71 would be the 55 million in auto assessments. So that was one of the drivers of the increase. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Furniture and equipment, we will be relocating in 2024. So in 2023, we will be prepping the office for that relocation. There is some work that we'll need to do around there and breaking workstations down and other things. So we've accounted for that. And then lastly, we do have a substantial increase on computer systems. One of these is due to converting over to a web-based application for our CAPS claims system. And then we also have a computer services increase, which relates to virtual file storage. So both of these are necessary items that we need to complete. And so we will move forward if this budget's approved with those in 2023. Okay. Any questions on our budget?
Tiffany, I just wanted to go back to the cyber policy. It's probably somewhat unique, as you mentioned, of the revenue fluctuating substantially. And I was just wondering, most corporations, their revenue probably doesn't fluctuate that extensively. So don't know if there's any opportunity to negotiate like a five-year average or something to try to level out that volatility in revenue.
So I would be surprised if there is, because it's off filed rates. So their rates will have in there what they have to utilize in that rating algorithm. And if it's off of your, most recent year's revenue, there's not really any room there to negotiate that, because then they wouldn't be filing their approved rates. But what I would say is that so far this year, like our revenue's down when you look at these 2 items. So I would hope that next year, we would have some leeway. The other thing though, that's really hurting us, it's not so much that revenue, it's we had a big claim. So, and we can't get rid of that claim. So.
Just one more comment to add to that. It's just uncharted territory, the methodology to underwrite cyber policies. So think we're all anticipating that the underwriting methodology and the underlying metric or financial they're going to look at is probably going to be subject to change because it's really hard to match the measurement that you're using to develop the premium versus how the loss is incurred.
Right.
And right now, this is their level playing field way to go, but I see that as changing.
Yeah, and I will say though, I thought about what are other opportunities if they were to change it. And you don't want them to go off of claims because those are very volatile year to year. You don't want them to go off of policies that are transferred to the Guarantee Association because those are volatile year to year. So there really isn't a mechanism that is stable because like salaries wouldn't be representative of the exposure, whereas, and honestly, I don't think revenues are really representative of the exposure either. But when you have claims and the number of various carriers that are transferring to you, those are each opportunities where we can have fraudsters coming in and creating some havoc in our systems. So really, there's not much that isn't volatile in the Guarantee Association from year to year for them to utilize that would be representative of the exposure.
Steve Holt here. I just want to mention that in my organization, we had a 100% increase in our cyber insurance premium, and we've had no claims and no findings on audit. So it's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I was a cyber underwriter at one point in my career, and I will tell you, it is interesting. And it's an ever evolving. And frankly, I think this is probably one of the foremost lines of insurance that's going to continue to evolve very rapidly over the coming years.
So this is David Nardecchia. So if they use the miles rating and the claim is the driver, why would we think that it might go down next year? Or did I misunderstand?
Claims is not the driver.
Okay.
Yeah, it's revenue. So that's our recoveries and John, there was one other thing in there.
The assessment was big this year. For 21, we had a $55 million assessment.
So
for auto.
So the driver is the revenue?
Mhm. Correct. And we will, we'll be talking about an assessment here in a couple of minutes. That will further increase that revenue if they continue to rate off of it next year.
Just for the benefit, our original policies, it was the amount of paper that you actually touched or had in hand before they switched over to revenues. So our initial cyber policy was based on the paperwork that came through the organization. When they switched it up to revenue, the way we use it. So it continues to advance in reference to how they're determining the actual premiums. And just like Tiffany, I was an underwriter at one point for 2 different carriers as well. So I know that they're going to continue to improve the process of how they charge the premiums.
Marvin, has this been a discussion at NCIGF? Are they trying to do any kind of negotiation or just a collective approach to some of the cyber insurers?
They're talking about it, but they're mainly focused on getting all the insurance guarantee associations to either get cyber coverage and talk about who's out there in terms of companies, because there's only like 3 or 4 major carriers that are providing coverage that are going to be around forever. There's a big discussion on cyber altogether right now in terms of how are the guarantee fund systems going to handle a cyber insolvency based on the services that are provided under the cyber policy. And what's the limit? We have a $300,000 limit. Others have $500,000 or $1 million. What coverages are going to be covered under that particular limit? So there's a lot of things. There's a draft paper out they put out a couple of years ago by a couple of fund managers. So there's continuing conversation as it relates to cyber and the transfer of risk.
Hey, John, can you take the next item? I need to go. Sorry.
Sure, happy to do that. Actually, can you roll to page 6, Stephanie, please? So as Tiffany had referenced, when she was talking about the budget, there would be a reduction in 22, excuse me, in the 23 budget. And that's driven by the fact that in 22, we're going to have strictly the audit fees and the agreed upon procedures. We are, again, it is an agenda item. We are going to talk about the RFP that we're involved in. We don't know, where that's going to shake out, certainly in that process, but we don't know what the fees will be. As we stand right now, we're looking at that standard course. We put together already our thoughts on some of the internal control areas for testing, but obviously it's going to be subject to further discussion as we work through the RFP. So let's see, the next section is related to, and I believe that Michelle McDermott's on the line. Is that right, Michelle?
Yes, I am here.
There you are. Should we throw the document on screen for y'all for your report, or?
That would be great.
So I just want to introduce folks from Plant Moran. We've got Michelle McDermott, who was the manager on the account. Is Michelle McHale going to be on, or?
I'm right
She
here.
is, yeah.
I'm right here. Hi.
Just want to welcome Plant Moran along, and they're going to be going through the specialized internal control review that was completed. And if you just shout out as to pages, and we'll have Stephanie reach those pages for you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I am the leader of our forensic practice. And so when Tiffany mentioned the word fraudsters, my ears always perk up. And thankfully, there's nothing that indicated that you have any problems here at your organization. But we're going to go through the testing we did and the results, the process. But I am excited to share this with you. I first would like to thank John and the team, because we wanted to present this much sooner to y'all, but I contracted COVID for 8 weeks. So hence the delay in this presentation to you all. So I appreciate and thank you for your patience in that. So we performed a specialized internal control review, if you want to scroll down. And that focus was on your cash, basically your cash in, your cash out, your cash receipts, your cash disbursements, including payroll. And how we performed this engagement is that we interviewed key employees to better understand the processes and getting into the trenches, if you will. We performed data analytics to identify anomalies and unusual trends that may surface in those tests. And then we offer some recommendations to strengthen the internal control environment. We're very pleased to say that we have very few recommendations, and we will go over those, as well as management's response to those recommendations, which was fantastic. We always encourage and welcome when management can comment on our recommendations. Again, you all are in the trenches. We are not every day. So Mick, or Michelle, we call her Mick because obviously there's two of us. Michelle, you want to continue and go through what we did?
Of course. So if you want to scroll down a little bit, we can start with, I think it's page 3 or 4. Yeah. So our report does include some information about, internal controls and why they're important and the things that we look for. But again, as Michelle said, we were focused on areas of potential fraud. So where could someone exploit the controls or potentially exploit the controls to, misappropriate funds. So to do that, this is, different than your typical audit. And so we did work with the audit team, but we do things a little bit differently and look at things that they may not cover in their audit. So like Michelle said, again, we were on site for 2 days and we did a lot of interviews. So we talked to 13 or 14 people, and kind of just had them walk us through what they do on a daily basis so that we can understand how the process works and potentially make some recommendations or identify areas where we might be able to make things a little bit tighter or, a little bit more secure. So like Michelle said, again, we did have very few recommendations. And as you'll see, when we get down to those, management's already all over them. So, so we're in a good spot. But if you want to keep scrolling in our report, there were 9 specific analytic tests that we did. And so these tests may be something you may not have seen before because, again, this is more of a fraud focus. So these tests were, meant to identify potential red flags. So just because these tests have a finding doesn't mean it's a problem. These are just things that we would say, hey, maybe we should look at these a little bit closer. So we went through these 9 tests, and for the items that did have findings, we looked at those findings to try to determine, should we be concerned, or, is this a part of the process? Is this the way the system works? And do these findings stick out and make sense? Are they here for a reason? So I will quickly walk us through these 9 tests that we performed. If you have any questions, please feel free to kind of stop me as I'm going, just so that you don't have to remember until the end what your question was. So we'll start off with test number 1, and all of our tests in this report are laid out very similarly. So you'll see that before each test, we'll say what the potential risk is, what we did to analyze that risk, and if we found anything or what the results were. And then lastly, we had recommendations for you all as to, maybe you should follow up on this, or there's no follow-up needed because the results were expected. So if we can go down a page, we'll start with number 1. So one of the first red flags that we look at is multiple employees with the same address or social security number. So this could be a red flag for what we like to call a ghost employee. So if a scheming employee creates another employee in order to pay an extra paycheck or something of that nature, a lot of times what we'll see in our line of work is that they use their own address or their own social security number for this fake or ghost employee in order to misappropriate funds. So what we did was we got what is called your employee master file, so a listing of all of the employees, and we went through to see if there were any duplicate social security numbers or employees with the same address. And we did not identify any duplicates here. So all good, nothing additional to research for this one.
And just to expand a little bit is we use special analytical software when we're doing these data tests. So it allows us to perform these tests because, as you can imagine, addresses are entered maybe slightly differently. Someone may use the full name street, or some may use ST. We're able through our software to normalize that data so that we can perform these tests. I just wanted to share that information with you.
Thanks, Michelle. So as we move on to the second test that we performed, again, this is another red flag to kind of identify fictitious employees or, again, a ghost employee. And one of those red flags could be missing information. So sometimes we'll see that someone who is, trying to commit fraud and pay an extra paycheck, when they enter this fake employee into the system, they don't include the entire address, or they have this this extra paycheck mailed to a PO box. So that is a red flag that we sometimes see. So again, we took a look at the information in your employee master file. And we did identify one employee with an incomplete address. However, the addresses in the employee master file are not used to actually pay your employees. So that was just missing information, but that address isn't used. So it was not concerning to us. And we also identified a PO box as one of the employees' addresses, which again, you know, just because we found a finding doesn't mean that it is a problem. So we researched this a little further and identified that this employee does in fact live in a rural area where mail is not delivered. So they use a PO box as their mailing address. We also identified some other employees within the employee master file where there was some missing information, such as a date of birth or a phone number, a start date with the company. So again, nothing concerning, but we would suggest making sure that when a new employee onboards, that all of the fields are included in the master file. So if there's ever a need to contact an employee, send out some sort of a letter, that all that information is readily available. So if we move on to the, I think number 3 is on the next page. So this test moves kind of on from looking at risks related to ghost employees and potentially looking more at, you know, a fictitious vendor. So if there is someone who is trying to, you know, make fraudulent disbursements, they could potentially create a fictitious vendor to try to have a payment made to this vendor through the system. So one of the red flags, very similar to with employees, is for vendors that have addresses that match other vendors. So we did do some testing on this, as Michelle said, with kind of normalizing the addresses as well. But we did find multiple duplicate addresses. And so this is something that is 100% related to the way that the claim system CAPS just processes information. So anytime there is an update made to a vendor, or there's a vendor who's, when a claim comes in, the spacing is different, for example, or like Michelle said, they use street, the full word, rather than ST. CAPS, just the way it works, it creates a new vendor. So it looks like there are multiple vendors with the same address, and it's really the same vendor. So because there were quite a few, we did do some detailed testing on these. So we picked 3 of the matching addresses just to confirm that these vendors, you know, made sense and they were not fictitious vendors. We don't have to go through these, I don't think, in detail, but they are here in the report for you to look at. And this is something too that you know, could be done on a, you know, quarterly basis or something like that, if you wanted to just pick a few and look, just to make sure that the duplication is related to the way CAPS is working and not because you know, there was something that got slipped in. But based on our review, the controls are in place to not allow that to happen in the claim system. I just want to make sure that we don't have any questions thus far. I know this is a lot of information, but we can keep moving on. So again, with vendors, if we go to our 4th test here, very similar, looking at vendors that have multiple vendor IDs. Another red flag. So seeing a vendor more than once, more or less, in the vendor master file. And again, we did identify duplicates for the same reason, because of the way that CAPS processes vendors. And then I think number 5 is on page 10. So another area that we look at in the vendor master file would again be looking at vendors with missing address information, very similar to us looking at employees with missing address information. So we did identify about 40 vendors with missing or incomplete information. However, 19 of them were employees that are listed as vendors for the purpose of expense reimbursement. So expense reimbursements are distributed in person to the employee. So there's no need for their address to be included in the vendor master file, and that's why the information was missing. And there were some other vendors that were missing information, which we've included in a table. And I think a lot of these were related to payments for workers' comp that are paid through EFT. Again, no need for the address because the payments are not being mailed physically to the vendor. And again, we did do some testing just to confirm that the incomplete or missing address made sense. There was one where this AHS Oklahoma Physicians Group, they just don't have a street address. That's just their address. So within the hospital system, I think they know where the checks go. And so that one, you know, again, just because there is a result doesn't mean that there's an issue. But we would recommend, similar to the employee master, that even if the information is not being used when the vendor is set up, to make sure that all of the fields are there just in case it's needed. So then we kind of get into the tests related to banking information. So a lot of times in our line of work, again, we will see that fictitious vendors, if someone is able to create a fictitious vendor and they get away with it, they'll create multiple. And anytime that payment is made electronically, it goes to the same bank account. So that is a red flag to identify fictitious vendors that are paid through EFT. So we looked at the banking information for all vendors paid via EFT, and there was one instance where 2 vendors shared the same bank account. But as you can see here, they have very similar names, and they're actually, because of the way CAPS works, again, it's the same vendor. So we got the support for those payments and verified that that was appropriate. And then there were some instances of vendors being listed in the EFT file, but their information was blank, and they were not paid via EFT. It's unknown why they were included in that file, so maybe just a little bit of file cleanup needed to remove them if they're not being paid via EFT. And then our next test, test number 7, is just kind of looking at addresses of employees and addresses of vendors. Another red flag in terms of fictitious vendors would be an employee setting up a vendor in the system, and that the payment information being the employee's address, to where, you know, if you make a payment to this vendor, it's really going to the employee. We use very cool software, as Michelle mentioned, and this one is really, I think it's awesome. It's kind of crazy that this is possible, but we have this software that uses the addresses, and it geocodes them and it places them on a map, and it can tell us how close 2 addresses are to one another based on a number, you know, the number of miles. So we identified 12 addresses that were exact matches. So they were in the exact same latitude and longitude coordinates. But those, again, were related to employees set up as vendors for the purpose of expense reimbursement. So not an issue there. And we also identified 2 vendors that were listed that were very close to one another, within 0.06 miles. But we looked at some supporting documentation there, and the payments to those vendors looked appropriate. So just happened to live near each other, and nothing of concern there.
So this test, as Mick mentioned, is pretty slick. I've been doing this type of work for over 25 years and have seen pretty much, I think, every scheme there is possible. There are this test is done because we have seen where neighbors have colluded to create a fictitious vendor type situation, and they live next door to each other, type of thing. So that proximity, that geocoding, that really does help identify and hone in on potential problematic activity. But you have no concerns there.
And then on our test number 8, this is something that you already do, or management already does. So what we did was we took all of the disbursements for our scope period, which was about a 2-year period, and we just summarized them by vendor. So we kind of just look at, highest to lowest, who's being paid very often or significant amounts. And we kind of walk through that with management to make sure there's no vendors that pop out like, oh, why are we paying them so much? Or that doesn't make sense. Another thing we do is just to make sure that the payments to some of these vendors are not personal in nature, or, something like that. So for example, one of the vendors we selected was Verizon. So that's something that we have seen many times in the past, doing our analyses where they're, the company uses Verizon for cell phone service or internet or something of that sort. And then there's an employee who catches on to that and slips their own Verizon bill into that accounts payable system, and that's getting paid. So we made sure that we pulled some Verizon invoices and we looked at them. They were all, the TPCIGA address. They indicated that they were a business account. They weren't for personal cell phone lines or personal home internet or anything like that. So nothing further needed there. And again, the team is already doing that, but we just did it again just to verify that those spendings seemed appropriate. And then lastly, another test that we do is we make sure that we're not paying any vendors that are not listed as a vendor in your vendor master file. So we did a quick comparison there, and we did not find any checks to vendors that were not listed as official vendors in the vendor master. So no results there, so no further research in that area.
So exciting for you all, very boring for us fraud investigators. So,
but that's what you guys like to hear.
Yes.
No areas of concern, and these tests, although they did have results, there was a reason for all of them. So nothing to worry about. So I think too, we also have some recommendations. And these are, again, because of the nature of what we did and what we found, these recommendations are not something like, if you don't implement this, there's gonna be a problem. These are just more or less almost reminders of things that could potentially be changed, or things that should just be kind of like on your mind, and top of mind, I guess, to make sure that we keep these on the forefront. And for example, I know previously in the meeting you talked a little bit about staffing changes and things like that. So these are controls that as staff changes and positions change and responsibilities change, we want to make sure that these things stay priority, and we make sure that with new people coming and going, that these don't get overlooked. So like Michelle said too, we already talked through these with management, and they provided their comments, and, already looking at these things or have changes in place going forward. So there's only, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so overall, truly, truly a sound organization, excellent controls, and I would compliment management as to their diligence in ensuring that those controls are in fact working as well as they are.
Absolutely. Do you want me to go through the 4 controls, or I know they're included in your packet?
Betsy, Tiffany.
What was that?
Rebecca's on mute.
You're on mute, Tiffany.
John, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like Michelle McDermott to go through the detailed findings and recommendations and management comments?
I would just go through the recommendations and how we've responded. I don't think we need to go through them all in detail.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have my paper here because it's a little hard to read on your screen, but if you want to make it bigger for the group, we'll start with number 1, and you can, I'll probably focus on the recommendations and then the yellow column. So if some of the rest gets cut off, that should be okay. So one of the things that we had kind of talked about was the process related to accounts payable, specifically for administrative and overhead expenses. The process for claims is rock solid, and there's many controls to ensure everything is correct, and they're automated. So there's no review that is done by human, I guess. It's all done by a computer system. They make sure everything matches before there's a payment made. And the organization does utilize positive pay, which is great, where you upload to the bank a listing of the vendor and how much they're supposed to be being paid, so that there are no discrepancies, or if a vendor tries to take the routing number off the bottom of your check, they can't cash a fake check or anything like that. But there are the file that is uploaded for positive pay is uploaded by the accountants who do also have access to the banking system, or I'm sorry, the accounting system to cut checks. So we just want to make sure that the positive pay is reviewed by someone else to ensure that there's a segregation of duties or a review to make sure that nothing is slipped into that positive pay file. And John reviews that, and he also signs off on all of the checks and looks at the invoices and all the detail to ensure that everything is supported. The second recommendation is, I wouldn't even really say much of a recommendation, but it's just kind of related again to the way that CAPS works and the duplication of vendors. And so we understand that it's impractical to go through your hundreds of thousands of vendors and make sure that the duplicates are, because there was an address change, or there was a name change, or doing business as, or something like that. And the organization does, when they add new vendors, receive W-9 information to make sure everything is correct, and make sure that they are legitimate vendors. And so when we talk to management about this, there is a part of CAPS that makes vendors inactive after 2 years. So if vendors are not being used, they're marked inactive. And that's something that we like to see. We say never delete a vendor, but we like to see them inactive if they're not being used. And then that helps us to identify too, if there's duplicates, but most of them are inactive, it's a name change. We haven't used that address for that vendor in a while. And that helps out. So that one is just just kind of the way CAPS is. So then when we get into item number 3, so as I went through those 9 tests, I know that there were some detail testing items that we did where we pulled some of the support for the tests that or the transactions we were looking at. And there were a few where there was a check requisition and the address on the check requisition was incorrect or outdated. And so we're just looking to make sure that whoever's reviewing that check requisition is making sure that the address is appropriate and or corrected. So we were kind of recommended that maybe putting a vendor information change box on the form so that someone can check it off and say this vendor information needs to be updated in the vendor master file. This address is older. You know, it needs to be fixed. But also, as we talked with management, there is a mail system that's utilized, and I believe there's an upgrade coming or may have already been implemented, whereby the mail system identifies if an address and a vendor match and are correct. So speaking of cool technology, that's another cool one to see. And then lastly, in terms of payroll, this one is just a recommendation based on kind of the size of the staff and just making sure that John stays involved in reviewing the payroll. He looks at everything before it's processed, but in terms of adding employees and pay rates and things like that, there is one person that has access to do all of that. So we want to make sure that John continues to review and looks at, you know, has anything changed in terms of pay rates? Is there an extra employee on this listing that I didn't see last month that I'm not, you know, I didn't know that someone was hired, and just making sure that there's nothing extra being added. And I know too, if there's an employee that inadvertently gets excluded from payroll, I'm sure John will catch that, but also that employee will be letting you know, so you don't have to worry about that one as much. But overall, like Michelle said, great controls. And I'll speak for Lisa. She's was on site with me as well. We had such a great time talking with your staff, and everyone was so nice. And it was funny because everyone said, we could tell you're from Michigan. And I said, how do you know that? Is it my accent? And it was because I was wearing a jacket. It was cold, but it was considered warm in Texas. But we had such a great time and everyone was so welcoming, and everyone is great at their jobs and knows what they're doing. And it was just so refreshing to do those interviews. And like Michelle said, just have great results. So thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the opportunity. You know, unfortunately, it doesn't sound like you'll need our services at any time in the near future. So, which is good.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. If you have questions, let us know. We're always here. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. All right. So we have one more exam that we're going to talk about, and this is the risk-focused exam by TDI. It is in attachment D if you'd like to look at that. But basically, they had no material findings as part of their exam. They did have one comment as regards our disaster recovery plan and not running that on a regular basis. We did respond to that and what we do. And then the report was officially adopted back in August. So there is no material findings or anything for us to review. If anyone has any questions or wants to read through that report, please feel free to do so in attachment D. Okay. The next item on the agenda.
Tiffany, can I interrupt? I think it would just be a nice to do if you moved that the board accept both the Plant Moran specialized internal control review and the TDI exam to document that the board has seen all the findings and recs of these reports.
Okay, I can do that. Should I do them as separate?
You can do them together, I think is fine.
Okay, all right, so I motion to accept both reports, the one from Plant Moran with our annual audit, or in the special audit, excuse me, as well as the TDI risk-focused examination. Neither report had any material findings.
Is there a second?
I'll
Sorry,
second-
Tiffany, if I cut you off.
It's okay.
I'll second the motion.
Is that David?
David. David, our next, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition or abstention? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. All right, so that moves us on to attachment E. So E is just a real quick update on IT enhancements. We had 3 to report for this last quarter. One was that we did some additional personal identifiable information training using our No B4 portal. So just some normal training. I think most companies are doing this today. Everything has gone well there. The second item, it regards some programming that we had to do. So as a result of the Lighthouse insolvency, we needed to make sure that we were able to get all of their data and have a better handling of that data coming in, because the Lighthouse insolvency was not fully UDS compliant. So we did have to have some programming work done in order to receive and process all of that information. The third thing that was done this last quarter is we did work to evaluate a new product for our sign. So this is our digital signature product, and we had a test group run through this piece of software, and we've received pretty positive feedback from the evaluation group on it overall. So we were really pleased with the findings there. So it gives us some increased capabilities to be able to utilize this type of software. And that's it for the technology update. All right, that moves us on to the next one. And so our next discussion is around assessment. So I do want to give a little bit of background here on the regulations as it regards assessments. So when we do assessments, they are for either the auto fund, the other fund, which is property, inland marine, anything that does not fall into auto or workers' comp from a line of business perspective, workers' comp, or an administrative. So we can do an assessment in any of those 4 areas. We typically do not do inter-fund borrowing. We can if we absolutely had to, but we pay auto claims, for example, out of the auto fund, and we don't typically borrow, but we do have that capability to do that. We can only fund via an assessment for what is known. So we cannot assess for the unknown that might be coming. So for example, we've had Lighthouse Financial, we've had Weston, we just learned this morning about FedNat being signed this week. Those are things that are known. So we are able to estimate what valuations we will put on each of those insolvencies based on the number of policies, as well as the number of claims. So as a reminder, we pay 2 different things out of these funds. We pay for unearned premium claims, which for both Lighthouse and Weston are both pretty substantial. So I'll go over those numbers in a moment, as well as we will pay any claims that are still out there and need to be settled. So as we start looking through this and talking about a potential assessment for our other, fund, keep in mind that we know these 3. We do know that there are some potential future, but they are not known for sure. So we cannot collect funds for those. So as we're going through this, I'm gonna look at, and if you could flip back to F. So the assessment history, you can see we have not done an assessment actually since 2006 in our other fund, which is where the majority of our insolvencies are coming from today. We did have actually a distribution out of that fund back in 2010. So, but since then, there's been zero activity there. We have done 2 assessments in the last 10 years. One was auto back in 2021. And then we did have a $20 million administrative assessment back in 2016. So as we flip on to G, okay, this is just the history of like the recoveries. And so if you scroll down a little bit more there, you can see like 2019, really, whoops. Sorry. You can see we had a lot of distributions, but very, very little recoveries. And as you look at the orange in the chart above, recoveries are pretty slim in recent years. We haven't had any, really major recoveries in quite some time. But in 2022, you can see that our distributions are on the upside there. I'd expect that number to go up very substantially with these most recent insolvencies and what we're taking over. So if you look at H1, this is our current situation, okay? So this does not contemplate any assessments, anything, happening in the near future, but it does show in year 1 a $50 million payment. That is Lighthouse and Weston. Those are unearned premium claims. So we heard from Annette earlier about approximately, and I'm rounding numbers here, 30,000 Weston policies and approximately, I think it was 19,500-ish for Lighthouse Financial. When you put an average premium claim of about $1,000 each, we're looking at $50 million. Now let's add FedNat from this morning. I don't know what the unearned premium from there is, but there were 3,700 policies that were transferring over to us. That's about, another 4 million. I'm just going to round up here for round numbers. So we're about $54 million in just unearned premium claims. That does not contemplate any settlement of actual claims. So you start going through these numbers here and you can see that our balance sheet as of July 31st next year with $50 million in known claims that doesn't even contemplate FedNat, we are negative pretty significantly there in our cash. And then overall, the other lines net cash, we're at negative $38.8 million. So you start putting this together. We do need to carry some cash in this account. We can't have it at zero balance, but we can't carry exorbitant amounts of cash over in the account. But as you play this out over 5 years, again, we are very negative throughout in the other lines here. And honestly, even in the auto line, we're not carrying a huge balance there either. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Nothing for us to really do or discuss with that today, but we are in need of an assessment in the other lines bucket here. So if you go on to H2, the next one there in your packet, we have put together and looked at various numbers on how much to assess. So we are looking at approximately $70 million in a potential assessment. This $70 million coming in the door puts us back in the black. But again, it doesn't contemplate any other, it should be able to handle FedNat. But if something happens from Ian, we could, and I'm just going to let you know this now, be in a situation where we will need to do another assessment if something large comes out of all of the carriers that are currently under watch in the state of Florida at this moment. Hopefully nothing comes of that, but we need to plan for today and being able to pay these claims. So that's kind of option, or that is one thing we need to decide is, one, are we going to do the $70 million assessment? The second thing is, if we decide yes on this $70 million assessment, are we going to do it now? Or are we going to wait and do it in 2023? What I want to call out is that the statute requires us to use the most recent financials for market share data. So if we do not do the assessment now and we decide to wait till 2023, we would be precluded from doing that assessment until at least, I believe, May or June, until the 2022 market share data is released. So what I would say is, if you go back to H1, we don't have funds to carry us over to that point. Now, it doesn't preclude us from doing the borrowing amongst funds and that and repayment and all of that. But really, if we want to keep things clean, and that's up to the board here, whether we do or not, we would need to very quickly notify companies that an assessment is coming, and it will be in fourth quarter. So I want to stop there. I kind of want to open it up just to any questions, discussion. What are people thinking? What are your preliminary thoughts?
Steve Holt here. Question for you in regard to borrowing from another fund. What fund has sufficient reserves to be able to handle the borrowing?
So the only fund that has sufficient reserve is workers' compensation. Administrative does have some in there, but I would call out, we're also pulling down our administrative fund faster than normal because we have pulled on more contract employees. The more claims we have, the more support and funds we need to support it. So I'll be honest, this is only my personal, opinion on this. I would not borrow from the administrative fund.
I know some things. This is Mike. I know some things have changed since we met on this, Tiffany, and knowing especially the hurricane that's coming in now.
Yeah.
Should we not consider can we hold off 30 days? I mean, I think we should get it done this year, but I'd like to have a little bit more information on having to do two. Instead of doing two assessments, it would be nice to do one and be done with it, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things there. One, if we hold off 30 days, then we will be running into 2023 for the collections of these payments, just because we have to give the statutory amount of time for companies to respond to, is this your market share? They have to respond back. So we have to send letters out to them, wait for them to respond. Once they do, then we have to send out the actual assessment, and then they have 30 days to pay that assessment. So we would be literally hitting them right at Christmas time. And to be honest, I really hate to hit a company at Christmas time. They've got employees, like honestly, a lot of employees out on FTO. They also have been finishing their books and closed their books preliminarily. So this would be hitting them, during that time as well. So yes, we can wait 30 days, but I think that even if we had to do another assessment, we're not going to know how much to even assess in 30 days because those companies aren't insolvent yet. They would have to go through the process in Florida. And I think we all hopefully can agree, Ian looks, at least from what the news is saying this morning, to be pretty bad. But it could be a year or, even longer before we know exactly what the ramifications of that are going to be.
I think based on what you just said, I think that's kind of prompted the question is, I don't think we have a choice. I mean, I think we probably ought to assess for the 70 million and realize that we may have to do this again, but it can be explained.
Yeah,
we can only assess on what we know. We can't guess on what may happen in the future.
Yeah, and I do think the 70 million will cover a little bit, not much. I mean, it gives us tiny bit of leeway. We could, honestly, we could go to 75 million now that we know about FedNat, because that's going to be at least 4 million in just unearned premium claims, you know, or approximately. And if any claims come out of that, that would be additional. So we could go a little bit more just to give ourselves the exact same amount of leeway that we had with the $70 million assessment, but it's not much. So
Tiffany, help explain, how did we get, oh, I'm sorry, is that Mike?
Go ahead.
How did we get to the, what was like the calculation to get to the $70 million estimate?
So knowing where both Lighthouse and Weston are today, and the unearned premium claims with them about $50 million, that was kind of our starting point. We also looked at where we typically hold our fund balance, and we are below that. So we don't want to be at zero. We need to be able to have a little bit of dollars in there, but nothing extraordinary. So as we looked through that, where do we ultimately need to be? This $70 million would, with no other insolvencies, would keep us in the range that we would like to be in for the future.
This is Steve Flynn. First off, I'm not an advocate of taking from other funds. So, and I guess I would support doing the assessment now and keeping the other assessment, should that come, kind of separate. So I guess my vote would be to assess now, whether that's 70 or 75 million. That's, I guess.
Oh, you're breaking up. I think we got, you said you would vote to do the 70 or 75 million now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Mike. I would vote for 75. I mean, we already know it's 75, so.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Why should we do 70?
We're already getting into October soon. So Tiffany, you're saying realistically, we could still get it done by the end of the year?
My understanding and talking with John, so John and I have had a couple of discussions around this specifically, is we would need to literally like do this in the next week to get this done this year.
Okay.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, you're absolutely right, because we do have to get the notice letters out and then we'll run the assessments. Now, the thing to bear in mind, we could delay it a touch as long as the assessment letters go out in 22. That could be December 31st. Then we're still okay. The money doesn't have to be collected in the same year.
Okay. It's great clarification. Thank you.
And normally it's a quick turnaround with the industry. Most of the companies will pay within 30 days, correct?
Yeah, in large part, like 95% or so what we experienced with audit.
And wasn't it like last time, John, when we did the assessment in 2021, there was only like 2 or 3 that you ended up having to like kind of try and get the money from?
Yeah, and we just, we have to remember that this was done so long ago that everything was very paper centric with letters. So we had to nail down in a different fashion how to reach out to people via email, because letters just circulated to companies. So we got a process in place, and I feel comfortable that when we work through the other lines that we shouldn't encounter such delays. But you are right, Tiffany. At the end, there were some small onesie-twosies, but nothing big after we did that exercise.
Yeah. And honestly, I'd be very surprised if the industry is not expecting some assessments. I doubt they're expecting from Texas, quite honestly. But given everything that's happened in Florida, and I'm not surprised. Like when I get the bill here at Liberty, it's just pay the bill. It's part of an expense of cost of doing business. So we know this is how the industry works, and we have to pay it. I will say it sucks in a year where inflation's killing the industry.
Yeah. I guess you still don't have to feel good about it.
No. But, so I guess like just kind of around the board here, people, I know Mike and I both have expressed 75 million. What are everyone else thinking? 70, 75 million?
Steve Holt, 75.
75, Flynn.
I
Yep.
support 75.
Okay,
So
is
do
there
I.
anyone who doesn't feel 75 is appropriate? All right, awesome. Okay, so we do need a motion for this. So do we want, before we do that, do we want to move forward with the assessment now?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I motion that the board approve a $75 million other lines assessment in response to the multiple insolvencies that have happened over this last few months. And to do this in the fourth quarter of 2022. Do I have a first?
So moved. This Mike Garrett.
Tiffany, when you say it'll be done in 2022, you put a payment date or a due date, which can't be less than 30 days after you give the notice letter. Did you want to give it a longer time, you know, pay this during?
I would say initiated in 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moved. This Mike Garrett.
Is there a second?
I'll second Mark Tatsui.
All right, any discussion or questions? Then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition or abstention? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously.
All right. Okay, so we're getting there on the Finance and Audit Committee. Let me flip back to my book here. We have the Northern Trust Fund Strategy Report, and I will turn this over to John because this is not where I'm good. So
let's see, where it goes, yeah, just go forward.
the green
Up
thing in your things if you received it in the mail.
We're going to number 7. Okay, good. So that's attachment I, and to Tiffany's point, Northern Trust did find them up for us, so that's what we're looking at. I'd love to tell you that I've got something inspiring to share with you with regard to our investment returns, but given the market activity and the limitations with our investment policy, it's very vanilla and very boring. Nonetheless, we've got 2 money managers, Paid Regal and Royal Bank of Canada. They're generally evenly mixed between what they hold. We're under a little under 500 million in money under management. If you scroll to the next page, Stephanie, as you know, we look at where we are to benchmarks indices. And those benchmark indices are based on our investment policy. So said another way, you take the investment policy, you put it through the benchmarking of what we trigger for, and we compare our results. You'll see that we missed the mark on a few occasions there with regard to the rate of return. You'll see there in that ROR, but very minuscule. So nothing of strong consequence there. You'll see up top there in the total portfolio, again, in Q2, we missed the mark by 19 basis points. Year to date, 22, we've missed it by 10 basis points. But inception to date, we're ahead of benchmark by 27 basis points. Our duration, the duration of time that those investments are held is holding at about 3.5 years or so. Which is kind of good news because as those investments mature, we're entering the marketplace with higher return in our bond portfolio. So there's going to be a little lift there, but nothing of great consequence or to share with you all. Any questions there? Okay, And the final item is duplicative, in that you all are provided with financial statements on a monthly basis. Queuing in on matching up the cues that we're looking at here. This section references our year-to-date 6/30. Last week, I provided you with financials for August and where we are there. And we're looking pretty good there as well. So I don't know if there's any questions on where we are from an administrative budget. Great. Tiffany, I think that concludes our very lengthy Finance and Audit Committee.
I do feel like we took up the majority of time today. So that's it for Finance and Audit. Thank you, everyone.
Tiffany, are you all going to discuss the RFP?
Oh, shucks.
Oh, we did skip that, didn't we? I'm so sorry. So we are required by statute for our auditors to go out every 7 years, or let me rephrase that. We need to refresh our auditor every 7 years. So we are going out to RFP. It is in process right now. So John sent that RFP out, I don't know, about what, 10 days ago or so, John?
Yeah, just about 8 days ago. It went out on the 20th, and we've asked the bidders to provide us with their intent by this Friday. Just to give you kind of a little benchmark, thus far, there are 5 firms that have committed to respond with the due date in mind of a proposal by October 21st.
Okay. So once that is responded, we will need to hold a special meeting to confirm who our auditor will be for this next round. So between now and December, we will need to hold that, and not only on the auditor, but once the auditor is selected, we will need to confirm the items that we will be auditing. So we have pre-selected those items. I don't think there's any big surprises in there. But again, we need to do the auditor and those items at a special meeting between now and December. So.
And Tiffany, in preparation for the board's review of those proposals by the auditors, I'll be providing you with a draft. I can even get it to you today. It's ready to roll. A grading process that you all can go through independently as a board, and then come up with an overall collective response that might help you make your decision for the auditors to select.
Yeah, and I would call out just for the board, we are doing this, it is statute. We are happy with our auditors, but it is always good to go out. One, rates change over time. You don't want your auditors to, I don't know who's on the phone still, but, get stale or anything to that, aspect of it. But we are going to, see this through and see what comes in. There might be some really good options out there for us.
Right. And just one clarification, it's a TDI regulation.
Governance, part of governance.
What does RFP stand for?
Request for proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any questions on the RFP?
All right. Well, thanks. We will move. Good job, everybody. That was a really good explanation and good discussion on the Finance and Audit Committee. Next, we'll move on to the second part of item 3, the executive session. I did not have any matters to bring up to have an executive session. Is there anybody that has a matter that either to get legal advice from Shelby or to discuss a confidential personnel matter? Okay, hearing none, then we'll just move on to item 9, which there's obviously no consideration and action on an executive session since we didn't have one. And then item number 10, which allows for public comment. But since there are no members of the public present, either in person or online, we will move on to our last item, which is item 11. Announcements and adjournment. So the next board meeting is scheduled for December 14th, 2022, and it will be an in-person meeting. And as we previously discussed, there's the possibility of one or more special meetings that will be very strategic. And I don't think that there'll be long meetings. We're talking about a consideration of a replacement executive director and the awarding of the RFP for the financial auditor and then selecting the items to be included in the audit. So with that, does anybody else have any kind of announcements or anything else before I will look for a motion to adjourn?
Do we have the dates yet for next year's meetings? I know we all responded to the proposed dates and when we were available.
I will have those dates by the time we have our December board meeting.
Okay. All right.
Anything else?
Well, if it's not till the December board meeting, there's dates already being filled up now, so we could have some conflicts. Is all I'm
Yeah.
getting.
That's what I was, my calendar's already filled up for first quarter.
Yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
the sooner we get those out, the better.
But we ask the dates on it, get something out to you to look at prior to December.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Anything else? Then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. It's Mike Garrett.
Mike Garrett moves. Is there a second?
I second Tiffany.
Steve Reiner seconds. Is there any discussion, questions? Then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition or abstention? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. So the time is now 11:25 a.m. and the Texas Property and Casualty Insurance Guarantee Association Board of Directors stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Back to the other. Just practice.
I don't know if I can run. I only have one. But I know it's over there. I want to see you guys.
Oh, I know. You gotta go.